Hello and welcome to our 7 8 minutes of weekly Torah talk. Our guest today is Rabbi Hillel Skolnik from the Southwest Orlando Jewish Congregation. Hello, Rabbi. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you for having me, Shmuel.
Tomorrow's parsha is Tazria, and this parsha continues the discussion of the laws of purity and tahara, tumah and tahara, purity and impurity. A woman giving birth should undergo a process of purification, which includes immersion in a mikveh, the pool of water, and she should also bring an offering to the temple. Male infants, as we all know, are to be circumcised on the 8th day of their lives. Tzarat, often mistranslated as leprosy, is a supernatural plague which also can afflict garments. When such thing happens, a kohen, a priest, is summoned to pronounce it as tameh, impure, or tahor, pure. A person afflicted with tzarat must dwell outside of the camp until he is healed. The second pasuk of this parsha says, דבר לבני ישראל לאמור אישה כי תזריע וילדה זכר וטמאה 7 ימים כי מי נידת דבותה תטמא. Speak to the children of Israel, saying, if a woman conceives and gives birth to a male, she shall be unclean for 7 days, as in the days of her menstrual flow, and she shall be unclean. So, Rabbi, this concept of cleanliness and purity is quite strange to the modern ear. What can you tell us about it?
Well, first of all, I agree with you that it's not exactly the kind of parasha that you show to people and they say, oh, I completely identify with that, or I love this parasha because it gets me so excited to hear one of the stories about Moshe and Bnei Israel. That's definitely true. And as a rabbi, when you're looking for engaging speaking material, you don't immediately go to Parashat Tazria. Having said that, though, I think that when I read through Parashat Tazria, one of the things that I'm drawn into is the idea of these different people who find themselves outside of the community and the mechanisms that are used for bringing them back into the community. I think part of the reason that people don't identify with Tazria is because of the fact, as you said, that Tzara'at is mistranslated as leprosy and is really this disease that no longer exists, but also because we spend our time in the 21st century trying to make people feel welcome within our communities. And this parasha, in so many contexts, brings people to a situation that we might not think would be of their own. I know in the Torah you get Tzara'at as some sort of punishment for having a spiritual or some sort of issue that has come up. But given that that's not the way that we think about disease anymore, it flies in the face of how we try to bring people into the community, as opposed to, in this week's parasha, people being sent out of the community.
So we are all about inclusion. That's the buzzword of the Jewish world today. And this parsha is not just about inclusion, it is also, to a large extent, about exclusion. When do we have to exclude someone, send him away for a certain amount of time?
Correct. But in thinking about that, though, I also think that it's significant that it was the Kohen whose job it was to investigate and inspect these potential tzara'at ailments. And in that moment, I think actually that Aharon was the perfect person to be looking at these things. Because as we know, Aharon was Ohev Shalom v'Rodef Shalom, that he was a lover of peace and a pursuer of peace, and I think he was exactly the right person to be Dan L'chaf Zchut. That the Kohen in a questionable situation was supposed to assume that it actually wasn't Tzara'at. He wanted to protect Tzara'at from spreading, but he wanted to ensure that a person wasn't cast out from the community unless it was absolutely necessary. And I think Aharon, and his love that he had for people and giving them the benefit of the doubt, sometimes to a much worse extent when he ended up building the Egel HaZahav, the golden calf. But I think in this moment, his way of looking at people and seeing them for the beauty that they have within them and the pursuer of peace in him, he was the right person to be this judge of Tzara'at.
Maybe he's also the person that people could trust, and they know that if he tells them that it's time for them to leave the camp, it must be it must be real. It must be something that they have to obey or to go along with.
I agree, because I think he would have only sent someone out if it was truly necessary for that to happen. Of course, the most famous person who ends up being sent out from the camp because of Tzarat is Miriam, when she has her issues with Tzarat. And in that instance, if I recall correctly, the entire camp really waited for her until she was cured of her ailment. Not everyone had the stature of Miriam that everyone would wait for them. So you're right, if they knew that Aharon was the one who was telling them it was time to go, or any successive high priest in that line of Aharon, then it's time to be very serious about it.
We know that there is a long process of identifying the tzarat and understanding all the signs and all the different ways it appears. Would you compare it in some way to a court process by which to determine if a person is guilty and if really all the signs appear by which to decide that it's time for him to leave the camp or to be in isolation?
I think if I were an Israelite, I would probably think about it as a court process, because I think in their times they thought of the tzara'at as a punishment for something that they had done wrong. But in our times, not thinking of it like that, thinking that our ailments and our diseases don't come as punishments for our misdoings, I think I'd probably think of it more as going to a doctor and getting a second or a third or a fourth opinion, and looking at it that way before we went ahead with a treatment, which in serious diseases and life-threatening diseases are extraordinarily sometimes helpful, but also very serious and potentially endangering treatments to our own health. You want to make sure that you are having the right treatment for the disease that ails you.
So you think tzarat is a disease? It's not something that was some kind of a miraculous appearance of some sort that no longer exists.
I think in the Israelite community, they certainly saw it as a miraculous or God-sent ailment of some kind that was sent for a reason. But I think that looking at it that way in the 21st century is not always the way that we choose to look at the things that cause us pain and cause us anguish. I think that puts people in a very difficult situation theologically. It's not the way that I think about disease in my own life and in my own congregation. But I also think it's okay for there to be a different theology when it comes to ailments for Bnei Israel than what we have in our own Jewish communities. We can develop as a religion, and we can continue to work our lives and live our lives based on the things that we read in the Torah, even if we conceptualize them in slightly different ways.
Do you get the impression that when people were asked to leave the camp, it was a humiliating experience for them in some way?
I would certainly think so. I mean, the goal was to be part of Bnei Israel. If you were outside of the camp, you couldn't bring your Korban Mincha, you couldn't bring your Korban Todah or Korban Shlamim, you couldn't bring anything to the Mishkan, to the tabernacle. You couldn't see your friends. If you were in Shevet Binyamin, if you were in the tribe of Benjamin and you wanted to go and visit your friend in the tribe of Zvulun, but you were outside the camp, that wasn't a possibility for you. And even amongst those who were outside of the camp, a person with tzarat was extraordinarily isolated. I would think it would be, if not a shameful moment, a sad moment, and a difficult moment for the person's soul. And that's why bringing them back in as quickly as possible would be so important. If you're Bnei Israel and you're trying to create the community that had trouble existing in times of slavery as a free people, the last thing you want to do is make people feel enslaved to a disease. You want them to be free from ailments so that way they can be free people and be God-worshipping people and be participatory in the community as much as possible.
Rabbi, thank you so much, and Shabbat Shalom.
Thank you for having me. Shabbat Shalom.